We are live on YouTube.
Awesome. So welcome everyone to this should be the fourth session on security. We have this link to the wall of shame, and we can do the same thing here, and just sort of jump in there and then sort of start fill out things that you can think of. I guess, do you guys want to wait a bit, or should we just go through it at the same time? Do people have a preference? All right, cool. I'll just get started then. So security. We don't compromise on security when building features. We use state-of-the-art technologies and research new security methods and technologies to make strong security guarantees. So first, sort of what we mean when we talk about security. So one way is think about just looking at up the definition of information security, that we sort of want to prevent unauthorized access and disruptions and modification and these types of things of information. Examples of this are things like private keys, transactions, the fact that we want to have end-to-end encrypted chat, darkness, cluster uptime, which is a form of, if you don't have that, it's sort of a destruction of sort of information exchange. When we talk about sort of compromising security for features, what does that mean? So just trivial examples, like for example, the fact that you can't restore your account because we don't have access to your private keys and we don't want it to be any other way. But also more subtle things. So for example, if you want to have proper forward secrecy, then either you have it or you don't. And in this sense, we're kind of responsible for setting secure defaults for our users and sort of telling them that giving them something that they can trust. State-of-the-art technologies. What do we mean by this? These are kind of like obvious choices for experts in a field. So examples of this are something like double ratchet and perfect forward secrecy with chat, which is sort of largely pioneered with sort of Signal and then ported to WhatsApp and a bunch of other chat apps. But also things like hardware wallets and reproducible builds, which are sort of known techniques. Also included here, kind of implicit, I guess, as a sort of layer below this is basic security hygiene. So not using passwords, the same password everywhere, having sort of two-factor auth and these types of things. And we're going to have sort of a security and privacy week after Prague that Corey is setting up that sort of helps with everyone getting sort of the personal and as well as the company security hygiene up a notch and people feeling secure about sort of their choices. One way in terms of sort of thinking about security is to just use like threat modeling and just sort of for people who have never thought about this way, but essentially you just pretend to be an attacker and follow the logic, right? That's the simplest way of doing it. And sort of, well, you have some house with some jewelry, maybe that's kind of high reward. And then if you have you're vulnerable because you leave the back door open, and then you have a thief, which is something kind of like a relevant attack. It's not out of this world that this could happen. Researching new security methods, and this is the kind of things that if you're not sort of reading about this or talking to people who are into this stuff, it might seem crazy and magic, and it is to some extent. Really, it's that is we want to be sort of a top 1 or top 10% of sort of tech organizations in terms of how much attention to put on these things, because security is sort of so much at the core of what we do and sort of the value proposition we have. And this means that some of this stuff might sort of seem unusual or crazy to some of you in terms of how much we care about it. So these are things like zero knowledge proofs for private transactions, and also sort of how you guarantee darkness, quantum secure algorithms, multi-party computation using sort of formal methods and so on. And there's a bunch of stuff just to sort of give people a hint of what sort of this might entail. In terms of sort of security guarantees, what it means. I mean, a lot of this sort of security stuff, it might seem difficult and so on, and it is to some extent, but to some extent it's also sort of easy. You can ask questions about this and learn. And you can be very explicit about these types of security guarantees. And obviously you can sort of dive deeper into it and be more technical about it, but you can also state some of these things in fairly plain language in terms of user stories. So one example of this is when it comes to end-to-end encrypted chat. So as a user, you don't want anyone but the person you're talking to see your conversations. And for forward secrecy, if your private key is compromised, someone else can't sort of read your historical conversations. Private transaction and darkness. So as a user, you don't want someone to know who you're talking to except the person that you're actually talking to. And as a user, you don't want anyone but sort of the recipient to know that I transferred money to them. So these are sort of basic use stories that anyone can understand, and then the technical details obviously way more complicated than that, but it sort of allows you to think about these things even if you're not an engineer. Some sort of pairing is security inclusivity. So just some questions here in terms of how do we ensure sort of a secure user experience while being user-friendly, and also sort of ensure that we provide utility for people and sort of aren't paralyzed by too extreme threat models. And also sort of thinking about how do we work iteratively in security and sort of communicate very clearly what guarantees we make and can't make right now. So one example of this is when it comes to darkness. There are obviously some sort of unknowns when it comes to Whisper, but there are also other things that we do that don't touch on Whisper that impacts the darkness guarantees we can make, and just sort of making this explicit for end users. Yeah, and then similar to before, we have this document. You can just fill in stuff here. And I guess with that, I'll hand over to Corey, who can talk a lot more about this in depth and will continue to facilitate the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar. I guess I want to start by giving a few of my opinions on a lot of this. First one being that something I mentioned in the previous town hall, which applies across the board here, is that if there is no castle, what do we defend? And as we decentralize all the things, both being Status itself and the Status organization, the process of doing that will further and further and further push. Like the more you decentralize something, the more you push security, as it pertains to everything, further to the nodes, further down the stack, if you will. And what that ends up being is that as you go fully decentralized, the end user ends up having all of the security risks, has to have all of the things properly built. So either build tools that allow them to do this easily and properly without them really thinking about it. And that's paired with a lot of education, so they understand how they need to do things. And that works both as a status user, so that they know how to use their status app appropriately. So we need to build status so that it has all the tools to help inform them on how to do that, and we educate them. And then organizationally, and it's such the way that like you as a contributor to status in the organization understand how to conduct yourselves properly on the internet. So you aren't exposing either credentials and status that make a big difference, or you aren't exposing yourself on the internet so that you can be maliciously attacked for various reasons. So like that's something you should always think about in this. And then how do we do that both as an organization and as a company that enables people to communicate securely in a decentralized fashion. So that's kind of a pairing. That's an example of a pairing that he just did with security and inclusivity. That's my pairing on security and decentralization. It becomes difficult and requires a lot of educational efforts in a lot of different ways, but it's the correct thing to do, especially if you want self-sovereignty over your information and communication.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially because if you have the opportunity to undo a transaction, you break the idea of the system. So what you're implying is actually that the easiest attack vector for hackers are not hackers, actually. They are scammers. So they are actually socially telling lies to people to make them do mistakes. So, for example, we had a lot of ICOs where users legitimately send their money to scammers. So this is also an attack, and something that we should also try to prevent. Because of course we have also these node features that are all the technicals. For example, the quantum resistance, that is a really unknown. But I think that as a status, our main focus is the end user. And of course, having the node security is basic. But who will run these nodes? We might assume that they have a more technical knowledge. But we will, as we get more mature, we make any user be able to become safely a node. So that would be the perfect scenario.
I would agree, and it's an iterative process, like you said. It starts with potentially only a small technical audience who understands these things, and then we can iterate on that to make it a one-click deployment of becoming a status node that runs safely on whatever you're running it on, whether it be your mobile, a desktop, a cloud server, whatever, or even like a mesh network, things like that. Eventually, because that then furthers some of the other principles we talked about in the previous sessions.
I'd like to talk about our authorization procedures on our different properties.
Okay.
And how it is that we can move them into our own authorization schema using just our public key. I think that's a pretty big wall of shame that we're still using third-party legacy authorization.
Authorization for what? Okay, so you have. I'm assuming you're referencing things like how we do authorization for. Like, let's just take for an example how we do authorization for notes. So our self deployment of the HackMD service on notes.status.im. We currently have Google authentication and GitHub authentication, and that is we have that there because we assumed. Well, at least I assumed that this was for status official communications. And if that was the case, then we should at least guarantee that the people who are using it are status employees or have some type of username that we can attribute to them, because if it becomes something that's like an official documentation for running a node or has some type of address to it, you need to send money. We would need attribution on who edits those things if it's potentially important, right? If it's like, say, if it's an address, you need to send money to do something for like staking your ENS username or something. I don't know. We don't want people to just arbitrarily be able to edit that to their own address.
Yeah, that's one aspect of that. We're using that for the blog as well, but of course we're also using GitHub authentication to manage our code base. And that gets us back to the discussion that we've been having earlier about justifying the choices that we make. I'm actually, it's actually less what it is that I want to throw into the round is and ask more, why aren't we doing more to actually be using our own public keys from our own system to be doing authentication and building the bridges to do so?
So we do a lot of that as well, because we are building smart contracts. And there is this dilemma that we have, like we need a multi-sig to do things in a safe way. So for example, currently I am the owner of names.statusnet.it, and I am the single owner of this subdomain. So I could change the records of it at any time. But like it's not enabled yet, this feature. It's not deployed in Mainnet, so it's not a risk. As soon as it gets deployed to Mainnet, I will move this registry to a multi-sig. But then there is this problem of coordination that we need to coordinate to sign. So we don't have a tool built-in status that enables us to do that. So I would expect that Status supports a multi-sig wallet built in its features. So I could interact with the app like I was a multi-sig, not like I am my personal address.
I see what you're saying there. And I think what Michael is trying to get to is that we don't even have to think about smart contracts too much here. If we're just talking about logging into various services that we use as an organization, whether that be the HackMD stuff, what Google Docs stuff. It doesn't matter. Like, why can't we just use the public and private key we're using with Status to log into these things? Because that's what we're using as our Status identity. Why can't we use that same public and private key cryptography to then log into various things? We can build tools to do this. It's not technically infeasible whatsoever, and it should be somewhat of an endeavor.
I agree.
I think one reason might be, because I definitely agree with this, and I think one reason might be in terms of maybe education and so on. Like, we have people like small contract developers and so on, but I think across Status we don't have enough people who are writing dApps and so on, because I think these types of things we could sort of churn them out and just like use sort of building blocks and like, here's a view for this thing and here you can sign principles or whatever, and these types of things. But I think maybe it's like kind of a bottleneck, and we aren't enough people who are sort of comfortable creating these types of mini tools in the same way that we are with the Web2 world, maybe.
Yeah, kind of extension.
So how can we incentivize that? Do we need to have bounties? Do we need to have just a straight jobs board like we're talking about with Contribute? How do we make these integrative tools that we need inside of Status happen more rapidly?
So we need to open a swarm about it and describe exactly what we want. Then we, of course, do a lot of discussions on top of the design features of it, just like the procedure we are having to build INS usernames and vote in the app and gas relayer. So we pass through that process, and we in Status can build this type of DApps that are used for our own company, and of course the users as well, anyone that are kind of default for Status. So, for example, Status usernames is actually just a smart contract. So users could fork that and use another contract to use names from another address. But why people would do that? I
think we need basically one-click installations, not that somebody has to fork their contract to do that. Why can't we be providing those as a service that is living on Swarm or IPFS, or where people can just basically, with one click, have that happen for them? That's the world that I want to see. I want a user to be able to, with one click, install a blog instance and have it served on a decentralized network. And I'd like that instance to be able to be logged into with a Status ID. And we need to get to the point where it's just basically one click for people to do that and not forking a contract to do that. That's the kind of infrastructure that I'm talking about building.
How does that clash with other principles like inclusivity?
I think that it's fair enough. It's a path that we need to forward. Right now, we are using really raw elements of Ethereum, like the crude method of signature. You don't use the identity yet. So in future, we're going to use identity inside of Status. That would open a lot of possibilities for authentication. And what you said about the apps that you want to install in a click, it depends, because there is some apps that you don't need to install. Like it's just the install is the download of the self-contained JavaScript application, like React or something like this. And so you don't need to install, you just need to run it. And what we need to ensure that Status would display these apps in a safe manner, that they cannot fake transactions, of course, or mislead users. So that and about the usernames being installable as a click, we can have that, like the official Status usernames, and that could be as an extension method. So something to discuss, but I don't see that we need it. Like
I'd like to change the topic a little bit and move over to something else within security. Does anybody else have any security concerns or like ideas about security as it relates to our principles?
I would like to see us make threat models and security guarantees more explicit. I don't know the best way to do that, but just in plain simple language.
I think that starts with something we talked about yesterday, and that is outlining and detailing all of these centralized services we currently use and why we use them. And then we can start to then outline all of the protocols that we use and the associated security guarantees of each of those. Like if we can have that in some type of Technicon, then it really, really, really broadcasts how we work and why we chose these things to make it work and what our plans are to then further whatever guarantees we're trying to have that align with our principles. How do we do that?
That was awesome.
Where do we start?
I think it's always some idea. Just list all these ideas in the path forward to replace them. So we can even have a timeline for that.
All right, so cool. How do we start? I mean, this is an action item that we should probably have. And I would like to start having people champion some of these things so that we know who is going to do it and what type of timeline we'd like. I mean, it starts with exactly that. You said, just listing the things we have. Do we need to start a swarm?
Yeah, maybe a discuss in a topic or a document that everyone can edit and start listing. But I think we can start in a discuss all that. But we need
I think
actually to
is not actually what it is that Corey's talking about. I think he's talking about basically a set of headers that are on a doc site that then get filled in. If I understand correctly, Corey, you're building a bullet point document on all of these things. And so what it is that we need basically a swarm and people to be taking responsibility for filling that out on a docs site. And the question is, does that need to be an individual docs install, or can that live on our current docs site?
I want us to broadcast our official status documentation, very much like how Signal has a Technicon on all the things they use and the interesting things around it. I want us to say these are all of the things that we use, both from a application and organization, that have these trade-offs, and these are our path. This is our path forward to moving. And it starts with us just doing it internally, so we can come together on where things are and how we'd like to go, and then publishing that as an official status thing. And that speaks to a lot of the principles at the same time. One is us knowing what security guarantees that we have, us being very transparent in how we operate and how we want to move forward in terms of like inclusivity, security, almost all of it.
So I accept the argumentation. Can we just have a security subheading on docs.status.im and just start filling that up? Because I mean, that infrastructure exists.
Okay.
So we just need a group of people who are going to be, committing to that content.
I'll clearly be committing to that. So.
Okay. So anybody else that wants to be doing that, raise your hand and start interfacing with Corey, please.
I think there's some overlap here with the PFS spec work as well. And also I think the DAX Zero would be interested in sponsoring this work.
Okay. Well, then I'll make a discuss to get people to, I guess, aligned with it, and then we'll figure out very specific details on how to move forward. Can someone make an action item for me so I don't forget, because I forget things in the notes?
It'll be in the notes, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll go through the notes. Okay. Let's see. Let's go through the wall of shame here. I have the first thing that I put there was we don't security audit onboarded core contributors. So this has a few different implications. One is I would like, and this is part of the security week, is to set a minimum bar of personal security across the organization, as well as audit the people coming in so they are at that bar, and and help them get to it if they're not there, as well as maybe augment it as new people come in. How do we feel about that? Is that because an aspect of doing security audits is possibly, looking at them to see if they're going to be an internal threat, whether inadvertently or advertently. Is that a kind of getting into people's privacy too much? Does that clash with other principles? Is that something we should do?
Sorry, can you say can you repeat the thing about potentially clashing with people's privacy? I missed it. I was typing. Sorry.
If I'm performing a security on somebody, I'm going to be digging into how they operate, like on a personal level. Is that something we should like mandate as becoming a core contributor? Does that clash with potentially infringing on people's privacy?
What do you mean when you say that? I guess it depends on the specifics, right? Like what do you have in mind?
Yeah, like how do you store your keys? How do you do things? That's them trusting me.
Questions around security, not some kind of personal computer audit or something.
No, it's more about questioning their protocols and procedures of how they handle things, and then seeing where they may be lacking and helping them.
I think
that would come out of your work in actually out of the Security Week and having those policies posted on the People Ops Docs page and also on our security pages. I would think people need to have some sort of expectation and place that we can point them to of what those expectations are, and then we could think about questioning them in a certain way.
Theoretically, our systems should be designed to be tolerant to this kind of faults. So if one individual messes up, it should be tolerant to this. If our systems are designed as a way that one person handles all the security, then we are in a bad design. So I would not care about too much about talking about how I store keys and all this stuff, but I think many people would care about this and will be paranoid about it. So I don't think this is actually good. But what is good is to consider that these people can fail or they can sometime misbehave. We cannot assume that they are forever a good actor. Not individually, but the key itself, the public key, we cannot assume that it will be always a good actor. So making it really resilient to that is what we should move forward.
In that light, another thing that we don't have as a company is incident response procedures. We may be looking at a lot of the threat detection around the smart contracts we deploy, but if something goes wrong within the organization, I'm not sure everyone in the organization knows what to do about it or where to go or how to mitigate it.
I agree. We should know how to handle that. But I'm saying the generic way. We cannot have this single point of failure, even in the legal aspects.
Corey, do you think this is the same as sort of the infrastructure monitoring in general? Because it doesn't have to be a malicious attack, right? It's just any kind of incident. I was talking to Jacob a bunch about that and how we can get some kind of basic monitor, like page duty or something like this, and enabling people to sort of check what's wrong with the mail server and these types of things. Do you think that's the same piece of work, or do you think that's different?
They align quite a bit, but I'm looking at more of a personal level. If someone feels something is wrong, they don't know. They don't have a place to automatically go to 24/7 to try and get it helped or mitigated.
So I think that's a great wall of shame, and that could also naturally translate into an OKR for Q4, I think.
Yeah, I'm behind that. I want everyone in the organization to feel safe, whether that be personal safety or organizational safety if they feel something's going on. And they should have a very clear and concise route to report that and have people respond to it quickly. Even outside the organization, even if just a contributor or someone who's looking at what's going on feels like something's going on that shouldn't be going on, they should also have a place to report it to us as status so that we can help mitigate it as well.
Yeah, you mean like
I don't feel that exists.
Someone is like sending emails personally directed to try to scam someone. So that is is very important to report it. I agree, because then someone could like take all the key holders, for example, of a multi-sig and try to scam all them together. Maybe they could succeed. Of course, the more amount of users you have in this multi-sig and signature you need, the difficult it's are. But I guess it's unlikely. But yeah, it's very important to report it. Also, like if your pen drive is stolen, something like this, maybe it's also important. Like the pen drive that you had your keys, and maybe it was not a too strong password.
The next question I'd like to ask from the Wall of Shame, Corey, is about our guarantees around darkness, push notifications, Web 2 services, mail services, etc. Do you see that becoming part of the doc site, or do you think that we need to be doing more public-facing communication about that? And how do other people feel about that as well?
So my quick answer is there's a few things moving in that direction. One is the docs we just recently said, if we're detailing all the things we currently use and the security guarantees around them, that'll help signal that, as well as things like Breaking Whisper, where we were specifically trying to figure out and do formal scaling tests on Whisper and darkness to see like how that stuff works. I think part of that endeavor will also help bring us of that to light.
So I agree, and I wrote this one down, and I definitely agree with what you said, Corey. I also think that outside of Whisper, because right now in terms of how we talk about it, we say like, well, Whisper is this darkness protocol, and we write it in market material and so on, and we've gotten better at it, but it's sort of lacking in this kind of intellectual rigor where Whisper is not the only thing we're using, and if you look at mail service or push notification and probably a bunch of sort of Web 2 services we use, they sort of all have an impact in terms of darkness. And I know for a fact that mail service and push notifications that they don't have the same security guarantees, yet we don't sort of make this explicit. And I think the fact that this is not explicit, and that sort of leads us to not prioritize certain pieces of work that would maybe mitigate this. For example, when it comes to push notifications and finding a better way, and also being explicit about what it means to trust a mail server. There's a parallel piece of work that's going on that Dustin's been looking a bit on, which is this analytics product. The idea being that sort of looking at metadata leakage in general, and then using it sort of as a form of analytics, and then work on sort of mitigating it. But I guess in general, it's just being more honest about we don't know, because that's the honest answer. We don't know if we provide darkness, and probably we don't, and starting there before sort of going into sophisticated Bloom filter mathematics in terms of anonymity set and all this kinds of stuff.
So basically our shame is that we need to be a little bit more honest about the realities of the software that we're building on and relying on.
Yeah, and I think also associated with that, which is maybe a bigger topic, is what are people's thoughts in terms of resource allocation? Like how many people are sort of spending serious time on this? I think Corey was pushing this Breaking Whisper product, which is a great idea. But I guess more generally, also in terms of researching new methods and so on, like how much do people feel like us as an organization, are we spending enough time on these things, or what would people like to see in terms of us being more rigorous about this?
I want as much possible research that we can do in this area, because the more we learn, the more we can put into our app that aligns with our principles. But I don't want to do it at the cost of wasting resources. And I'm not sure of what those resources are and how far they'll last.
This is a classic place for DAC, I would guess. Yeah, that we get together and fund that and look for matching funds. I think this is classic DAO and DAC stuff.
It would be interesting to,
Oscar, real quick. I would like to hear from people in this chat. We have 43 participants, and maybe 4 or 5 of us are talking. I'd love it if we can get someone else to talk.
I'm happy to talk. I don't know if this is the resources or time you were getting at, but to me it feels like any security measure that we put in place also needs to work against social engineering, and people need to understand how to use a security mechanism effectively. And in order to do that, we need to test whether people maybe not necessarily understand, but at least follow a desired course of action afterwards to make a security measure effective. For that, I think by far we don't have enough time or resources to do that sufficiently at the moment.
Someone else? I'm purposely being quiet so that others can talk.
I think based on Hester's comment, like, I think it would be interesting. I know we were exploring and talking about it before, but really helping users understand these implications and showing them the choices they're making. It helps you learn, right, about what's happening if something is, public or private, or, I think there could be some work that we could do together in the UI to really help show the implications of the choices you make. I mean, agnostic of whatever design language that is. I mean, just in terms of teaching a user, because a lot of this is quite technical, and for them just to visually understand what they are or see the repercussions of these choices, I think helps them immediately learn. Like when you see something that you've done, or, there's a direct implication of like your finances, people will pay attention, I think, to like this choice and understand. So I think in some ways, after we have this foundation, it would be really interesting to explore how we can communicate that so simply, to people within the interface about the choices they make.
So since it's quite quiet, let's talk about the wall of shame item of reproducible builds and multi-party signatures. What can we do about reproducible builds, and why aren't we doing more?
There's quite a bit going on right there in the deterministic builds channel. I know that there's quite a bit of work underway, and that what that does is also enable a lot of the other things that we're trying to work on, especially in terms of the points made in inclusivity, of getting the app to people into people's hands through means outside of the App Store. And that is, it's hard to verify that you've built something correctly if you don't have something to reference it to, like an official build to reference it to. And I know the deterministic builds is working a lot on trying to make that happen, but it's very difficult with the way we build status currently.
Is this kind of like, sorry, how Linux is, like how those distros work? Like, do they always resort back to the original, or how does that work?
Yeah, you should be able to basically build something by yourself and then look at how the company that built it or that writes the code builds it and compare them through the hash, the final hash in which they're done. If those match, that you say, all right, I did that correctly, and things work as they intended to. Or like even if you get a binary from somewhere, someone else built it, whether it be the original organization or some third-party organization or your friend, you should be able to check to make sure it matches the reference implementation or all the ones that you know to be good.
So let's say like somebody in India or China or Iran, they could just have their own status build in that country or release their own version. And they would keep just checking back to see if it was accurate with ours.
Yeah, up until the point of the changes they make. If you make any changes whatsoever, that hash is gonna be gone. So like if someone is using a forked version of status, which we hope to enable very soon, like as we increase the ease of building status, that makes it easier for people to fork and make their own version and make the modifications that they want, which is something we really want to enable in terms of inclusivity. Then they would have to then signal their specific build fingerprint, and then people would know that they got the right one from them. But in terms of providing a reference implementation, which is what status should be doing, we have to say, this is the fingerprint of our build. If you build what we make and you want to use it the way we use it, this is what you should get. And if you get something that's different, you should know why it's different and where it came from, or know something's wrong. That's not currently possible, other than they download it from us, from our official IP, in online documents and assume that it's done correctly, or they get it from the app stores. And so the app stores are somewhat of a signal of correct builds because you can only put something in the app store from us.
So can we have, are we thinking about having some sort of public key, some public key from status associated with that?
Yeah, that's part of that build process, of like the deterministic build process.
And you would have multiple key signatures. I have a question with regards to sort of the pyramid of pain and these things, because there's obviously a lot of things we can do here in terms of research, and also if you go into private transactions and like all these types of things. What are your thoughts in terms of like how can we make the problem, or sort of not this problem, but sort of these guarantees, like how can we make it sort of more like we're building something where we start with the very basics and ensure that those are taken care of, and sort of that it reflects the pyramid of shame in terms of how we do resource allocation and what we pay attention to at what point in time. Do you have any thoughts on that, Corey?
It's a hard one. I've been trying to figure this out myself for quite a while now, because like a lot of the resources are not made for organizations like this, or how you build applications. The pyramid of pain is not for a decentralized application like BitTorrent, or how we use things. And so trying to find the allegories or analogies has been kind of difficult for me, particularly because as you, like I said earlier, as you move towards a more decentralized environment, you push a lot of the responsibility of security to the end users or the edges, which makes it difficult to look for these things. So like it's almost as if the tooling provided by Status helps with the lower end of the pyramid in terms of the standard things that are easy to get around. But education is the thing that mitigates the top end of the pyramid, the behaviors of attackers.
So then I guess as an action point, really across the board in security, is that we need to be more proactive in educational efforts. And the best way to do that is with efficient documentation, and then public-facing communications pointing people to that. And then in addition, finding out how it is that we can use our own real estate inside of our application to increase education efforts. Is there general agreement on that?
I agree with that. And I would like to then ask, am I doing enough in that? And what can I do better?
Yeah, and also what Ned mentioned about user interface, maybe we should make really nice graphs, not graphs, but images to show people what implications of security they are handling.
Yeah, I think we need to find ways to integrate the implications in the user interface itself. So I totally agree with education of contributors. When it comes to education of like end users, I don't think it's a sufficiently effective way to make sure our security measures will work. There's a lot of things that I've learned and yet do anyway. Education isn't always the, let's say, the thing that will push you to do something differently in the moment.
Okay, Hester, but how do you feel about us being able to say, well, in essence, we told you so? How do you feel about that we have this in the user flow and that information is there? Do you feel like that would decrease the user experience if they have short messages or combined with images that are explaining to them security implications? Can that be, a part of our brand identity that is useful?
I think it's useful, and I think it's a very good first step. I wouldn't want for us to get the perception that because we told people so, they will understand. And because we told people so, it's out of our hands. Because I think there's a lot more that we can do in the user interface itself.
So I just saw a message in chat about looking at what what MyEtherWallet and MyCrypto did about security education. Ricardo, do you want to say something about that? Kind of short, expand on that.
Yeah, what they did is actually they made a really scary message and a lot of text, and try to make the user actually go through that process of understanding. And I think it's really good. What was, in my opinion, it's good. The idea they have, and maybe we can try to make that text even more easier. So with graphics, maybe a video, maybe don't know. We try to figure out something like this, because I totally agree. It's really important to have this security education, because this is the main attack vector. Of course, we need to take care of our builds being deterministic and make everything safe in our status.im website. But the main attack vector of we're going to have are scammers. So this is how we prevent people sending money to bad ICOs, for example. I think it's relevant. It's a scam.
We're talking about the social engineering aspect of security here.
Yeah.
Is that really something that we want to take on? And I mean, it's a huge amount of resources for us.
So I've spent a tremendous amount of time talking with MyCrypto, Taylor them, about these very issues, and I heavily respect their allocation of resources to help educate users. I mean, if we want to be the portal to Ethereum, if we want people to access Ethereum through Status, then we need to have them feel safe about using Status, and that comes with our attempts to help educate them and do things so that they're aware of these current issues, as well as potentially mitigate a lot of the obvious scam type stuff.
I also want to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to point out that this is a very real problem. That was a big thing last year, and it used to be the case that we, around a year ago, I think it was, we had Slack completely open, and then we had a lot of scammers, and people lost tens of thousands of dollars because people sent these links and they pretended to be certain people in Status and so on. And that led to sort of the closing of Slack, and then sort of having Riot and doing this sort of custom whitelist logic thing, which was like kind of semi-centralized kind of moderation tool. And as we're moving to sort of Status with links and so on, this will be a problem again. So it's definitely a real thing, and people lost real money. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's probably hundreds of thousands.
And as we facilitate the ability to send money through Status, and when it becomes a problem in Status, then that makes it easier for that type of behavior to happen. And as we do censorship resistance and inclusion, it's going to butt up against our maybe desire or feelings about mitigating it. And so the only real way to do something about it is to do things like MyCrypto did, which is somewhat of an annoying modal or text or something that educates users on that type of behavior.
So we should consider.
So can we take as an action item to design some of these types of approaches and get them into user testing, Hester?
I would also argue.
I was on mute. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, totally. I think that's what we should doing. It also goes back to what my point in Wall of Shame was, that to do these things right is extremely time intensive, which doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it, but I think it was a fair question of you to ask, like, do we feel responsible? Is this something we want to do? And then as a result of that, we need to prioritize it over, for example, trying to understand in what market our Status is most interesting, for example. Like, it's more a matter of prioritization in a way.
Isn't that kind of cross-market though? Isn't that really a global interest, in regardless of which market, that this is a threat model, and that we should increase it in the priority list?
It could be a choice. Yeah.
Ricardo said something great, I think, in the chat, that many people are coming from sort of a trustful, authoritative model and moving to this sort of trustless or trust minimized unpermissioned model. And I think this also ties into sort of reputation systems and how people think about trust and communicating this in the UI. Like your friends, they approve of this and these types of things. And like this is where things like staking, this is how much money is in this sort of being bet on this being a legitimate channel or these types of things, and taking this sort of communicating trust and reputation for various mechanisms and having that sort of embedded in our designs, I think would be useful.
Can you also think about like some special modes if there is some features that are not super secure now? For example, if it's push notifications that we know are not encrypted or whatever, can we make just, let's say, a couple of modes? One of them is paranoid mode. And if you choose it, then by default, you have all features that are lacking, let's say, security now, switched off. And then we just list them. Okay, you enabled paranoid mode, then you will not get push notifications, you will not get mail server history, but you will get something, so enjoy. Then we might get like some medium mode, like, something in between, and then use all features, but be informed that at the moment we have this and this and this things that are not yet secure. That's it. So of course it will not.
When I first joined Status, there was a discussion about revolution mode, and people were talking about different naming conventions. And I think that that the approach that Ned has suggested visually is exactly what takes that into account. Is that we use color and shape and information to delineate the types of features that people are enabling, and that maybe we should be looking towards building those types of components.
I'm not sure, like from implementation point of view, what you should do to show persons that push notification is enabled. Like, but okay, it's of course a design question. It's like the same thing as Hester mentioned about, being educated, being informed, and actually acting on it. And sometimes, really, when I'm using my crypto, for example, and I just know what was written, maybe half on that pop-ups, I just click through next. Yeah, it's my problem, but still some people will do. And or they need some place to return to and read it again and, think about, or just a simple 3-4 modes in the app where we actually provide them with our knowledge of our app, and they can kind of trust. If they're in paranoid mode, then that's it. Because, for example, if they know that push notifications are not good enough right now, and they will turn them off, maybe there are more features that they have no idea. And for example, mail servers, if they will not go to some advanced mode, they will never see this, and they don't need to think about it. So it's like an umbrella where we just, combine the features that are secure, not very secure, and totally not secure, and help our users to make the choice. And of course, education is super important. And for example, if someone is proposing you 1 Ether and they will send you 10 Ether back, this probably we can't moderate, because we don't want to moderate anything. Like we want everyone to be able to participate. So this is where we need to educate only. But in the places where we can provide something, where we can say, hey, turn paranoid mode and you're secure, I think that's it. We don't need to waste, like, I don't know, an hour of user time to just to use it.
I agree with that. So Hester just posted in the chat where it is that a document about where it is she thinks that we can surface that in the interface. Hester, could you add that to the Wall of Shame action point under education in the HackMD document? That would be great. So we're 5 minutes away from the end of this session. Do we want to wrap this up in any sort of way? Have we come to a good understanding of where we're at and where it is that we want to go?
let's reiterate action items that we came to from this, and so that people can understand what we're going to be actively working on from this discussion. Are those in the HackMD document right now?
Yeah, I think it would be really great if we can increase the action points in the HackMD document. That would be
if we could just spend the next 5 minutes making sure we have those recorded on the HackMD document, then we can move. Everyone can understand how we're moving forward and whether or not they'll be a part of that specific bullet point. We put that somewhere. We have a wall of shame. I think that, we just have bullet points under the wall of shame and then action items. I'm not sure where we've put those.
Let's take the action items out of HackMD into a discuss post. I think would be good.
Okay.
I'm also posting
I just want to make sure that like we leave from this with like clear knowledge on how we move forward. And we have a lot of the wall of shame items that we can then bring into more like concentrated wall of shame things, but then the action items associated with them, I want to make sure we start working on those too.
So the wall of shame is the problem, right? And then the action item could be just right under it as a to-do item. So maybe.
Okay.
And then we can talk about them and discuss as well. So what's the?
Then I will spend some time going through the notes and try and make that discuss post.
So I posted one for Sensor Persistent. I was just thinking about like copy pasting the HackMD once the session is over and then putting it in discuss. What do people?
That's fine.
Yeah, I think we should just continue doing that over into discuss. That would be enough, and then to continue the dialogue there, and then it'll expand out wherever it is that it needs to go. And we'll post it on the blog as well with the slides and the notes like we've done. I think that's a pretty coherent approach to internal and external communication about this issue.
Yeah, I agree. And then also, if people want to sort of elaborate or add stuff to the wall of shame, that would be great in discuss, so we can sort of have them be more self-contained, and then we can sort of think about how we want to prioritize them and these things. Right.
Cool. So that was an amazing session, Corey. I really want to thank you for the way that you educated all of us and told us what it is that we need to look at. It was really, really enlightening.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I hope to have more of these. These help me tremendously, help do my job as a core contributor. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you. See you guys tomorrow.
Yep. Have a good night. Have a good day, or whatever it is, wherever you are in the world.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.